Have you ever counted coins at a grocery store checkout, afraid you wouldn't be able to feed your child? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a young mother who had every reason to give up. No support, no money, no hope. All she wanted was to buy a can of baby formula, but she was 50 cents short. And what felt like just another humiliation ended up being the beginning of something powerful. If you've ever felt alone, lost, or hanging on by a thread, stick around until the end. This story will remind you that miracles still exist, and sometimes they show up dressed as ordinary people. So go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs a little faith in humanity. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in line at the Walmart checkout, her hands shaking as she counted her last few coins for the third time in a row. Her baby cried in the shopping cart beside her, and cold sweat trickled down her forehead even in the biting Detroit winter. She was just 50 cents short, 50 lousy cents away from buying the formula her 8-month-old needed. But she didn't have it. The people behind her began to grumble, growing impatient, and Sarah felt the weight of the world crashing down on her 19-year-old shoulders. What she didn't know was that the man in the $1,000 suit standing behind her was about to make a decision that would change both their lives. A moment born out of annoyance that shifted completely the second he saw a silent tear roll down that young mother's face. Robert Harrison, a multi-millionaire CEO, had only stopped in for a coffee, but he walked away with something much more. Sarah Mitchell's life had always been a daily battle against not having enough. At 19, she was trying to raise an 8-month-old on her own, while juggling bills that seemed to multiply like weeds on her kitchen table. Every day was a brutal equation. Could she pay rent and buy diapers? Would there be money for formula and the electric bill? The choices were never easy, always painful. Her tiny apartment in one of Detroit's most forgotten neighborhoods was all she could afford with her part-time job at the local diner. 3 cramped rooms, where the smell of damp walls clashed with the sweet scent of baby powder. The paper-thin walls did nothing to keep the freezing Michigan air out, and Sarah spent most nights awake, not just because Noah cried, but because anxiety gnawed at her empty stomach. Every morning came with the same terrifying question: will I make it through today? The near-empty fridge echoed her fears, and the dwindling can of baby formula felt like a ticking clock, counting down to another meltdown. Sarah carried the weight of motherhood on her shoulders, shoulders that were far too young for such a load. She hadn't asked for this life, but she faced it with everything she had. Loneliness filled that apartment like a fourth wall. No family to call. No father in the picture to help carry the burden. Just her, Noah, and a growing pile of overdue bills that mocked her every effort. Every penny was stretched, counted, and stored with the precision of someone who knows that survival can come down to a handful of coins. Desperation had become her closest companion. She woke up with it, worked with it whispering in her ear, and went to sleep with it pressing on her chest. Living on the edge, always one crisis away from failing her baby, was a constant storm inside her that wore her down, day after day. That cold January morning, when she opened the formula can and found just a few scoops left, she knew she had hit a wall. The last few coins she'd been saving in the glass jar on top of the fridge were all that stood between her and complete despair. Those coins are what brought her to Walmart that morning, holding Noah in her arms, silently praying that somehow today would be different. Detroit's wind cut through her thin coat like blades, and each step felt like a slow march toward her own reckoning. The shopping cart squeaked loudly as she pushed it, an echo of her own fragility. There she was, a young mother fighting through yet another day of a war she wasn't sure she could win. The towering shelves of the store stood like monuments to a life she couldn't afford. Every item she passed was a reminder of what she couldn't give her child. She walked straight to the baby aisle, her footsteps crisp against the cold tile floor, each one amplified by the urgency pounding in her chest. When she grabbed the cheapest can of formula she could find, her hands trembled slightly. That little metal container meant more than food. It meant a few more days of peace, a few more days without the fear of failing. It wasn't just a product. It was survival, sealed tight, and sold with a price tag. The walk to the register felt endless. Every step dragged by the weight of anxiety, every breath heavy with uncertainty. Sarah had done the math at home, counted and recounted those coins. If they didn't add up, she didn't even want to finish that thought. The sound of registers beeping and shoppers chatting blurred into a background hum, like she was trapped in a snow globe, watching the world move around her while she stood still. She held Noah close to her chest, the tiny warmth of his body grounding her as a storm of fear swirled inside. Sarah Mitchell was born to be stronger than the life she was handed. At just 19, she carried invisible scars from a childhood marked by absence, a father who left before she even knew his name, and a mother slowly consumed by addiction. When Sarah was 16, she lost the only person who had ever truly loved her, leaving her alone in a world that seemed to have forgotten she existed. The foster care system became her reality for 2 long years, bouncing from one house to another like a ghost searching for somewhere, anywhere, to call home. Every new family came with fresh hope, and everyone ended in heartbreak. Sarah learned early not to trust, not to get attached. She built walls around her heart to protect what little was left of her innocence. She wasn't just surviving, she was molded by pain into a young woman of quiet, fierce strength. By the time she turned 18, Sarah was officially on her own. No family, no safety net, nothing but sheer grit and a burning determination to build something better. She managed to get a tiny apartment and a part-time job at Mel's Diner, serving coffee and sandwiches to blue-collar workers who barely noticed her. She was invisible to the world, but step by step, penny by penny, she was claiming her independence. That's where she met Marcus, a 22-year-old guy with an easy smile and even easier promises. He talked about dreams, about their future, about how she deserved to be loved. And Sarah, starving for affection, believed every word. For a few precious months, she felt whole. She felt seen. She felt loved. It was the first time someone had made her feel special. The pregnancy hit like a storm. Sarah found out she was expecting Noah the same week Marcus vanished without a trace, leaving behind a scribbled note on the kitchen table. "I'm not ready for this, sorry." 7 words that shattered what little faith she had left in love, in people. Once again, Sarah was alone. Only this time, she was carrying a new life inside her. Pregnancy was lonely and terrifying. With no money for decent health insurance, Sarah depended on the public system, endless lines, judgmental glances. She worked at the diner until her 8th month, hiding her growing belly beneath oversized aprons, terrified she'd lose the only income she had. Every kick from the baby reminded her that soon, she'd be responsible for a life far more fragile than her own. Noah was born on a chilly night in May, in an overcrowded public hospital where screams echoed down the halls and nurses rushed back and forth. Sarah gripped the hand of a stranger through labor, wishing with everything in her that it could have been her mom. When they placed Noah in her arms, she felt a love so intense it hurt, a connection that both terrified and healed her all at once. Being a single mom at 19 was like being thrown into the deep end and told to swim. Sarah had no manual, no experience, no one to call at 3 a.m. when Noah cried for hours. She learned how to change diapers through YouTube videos, learned to decode baby cries through trial and error, learned to function on 3 hours of sleep and cold coffee. Her part-time job barely covered the basics. Sarah juggled bills like a circus act, paying one this week, skipping the next, always begging for more time. Her pride wouldn't let her ask for government help, a mindset carved from years of being overlooked. She wanted to prove to herself and the world that she could do it on her own. But the nights, those were the hardest. When Noah finally drifted off and silence filled the apartment, Sarah let the tears come. She cried from exhaustion, from fear, from aching loneliness, but also from a love so deep, it stole her breath. She whispered promises into the dark. "I'm going to give you a better life. I swear you'll have everything I never had." At 19, Sarah Mitchell carried the dreams of 2 people, hers and Noah's. She dreamed of a bigger apartment, financial stability, a chance to give her son the childhood she was denied. But more than anything, she dreamed of the day when she'd no longer have to count pennies for formula. The day she could look into Noah's eyes and say, "We made it, baby. We finally made it." Sarah's strength didn't come from age or experience. It came from pain and responsibility, hammered into resilience. She was young, but life had aged her in months. She was inexperienced, but had learned lessons many never would. She looked fragile, but deep inside, she carried a kind of strength that surprised even her every time she managed to survive another day. The little obstacles of everyday life were like a constant drip, each one small on its own, but together, they wore Sarah down like water-eroding stone. The laundry machine in her building broke on a random Tuesday, forcing her to wash Noah's tiny clothes by hand in the cramped kitchen sink. Her hands turned red and rough from the cheap soap, but it was the only way to keep his onesies clean without spending money she didn't have at the laundromat. The apartment heater worked when it felt like it, leaving mother and son shivering through Detroit's freezing nights. Sarah slept with Noah in her arms, using her own body to keep him warm, waking up with aching limbs and a stiff neck. Sometimes, she'd turn on the oven and leave the door open to heat the room, a dangerous move that made her nervous, but she had no other choice. At the diner, Sarah dealt with the quiet hostility of a few older co-workers who saw her youth and her situation as reasons to judge. Should have thought it through first, they'd whisper, when they thought she couldn't hear. Irresponsible kid, they'd say to each other. Every word felt like a tiny stab, but Sarah swallowed her pride and kept showing up. She needed that job more than she needed her dignity. Mr. Rodriguez, the diner's owner, was kind but firm about schedules. When Noah got sick and Sarah had to miss a shift, she knew that meant less money at the end of the month. There were no sick days for part-timers, no benefits, no safety net. Every missed shift was food off the table, a bill left unpaid. Detroit's public transportation was her only way around, but riding packed buses with a baby, a stroller, a diaper bag, and a bag of groceries was nothing short of a marathon. Sarah mastered the art of folding the stroller with one hand while holding Noah in the other, balancing it all while digging for bus fare. Other passengers rarely helped. Most gave annoyed glances whenever Noah cried. Doctor visits were a logistical and financial nightmare. Even though public clinics covered the basics, there was always something. Some cream the pharmacy didn't stock, a test that had to be done privately, a long ride to the hospital across town. Sarah ran mental spreadsheets constantly, calculating whether she could afford diaper rash cream or if it'd have to wait a few days. The loneliness grew louder by the day. Sarah watched other moms at the park chatting in groups, swapping numbers, planning playdates. She stayed on the edges, pushing Noah on the swings, listening to snatches of conversation about private daycares, baby swim lessons, family vacations. It was like another world, so close she could almost touch it, yet completely out of reach. Small health issues turned into big crises when you didn't have insurance. A toothache Sarah ignored for weeks turned into a full-blown infection that left her face swollen and burning with fever. She had to miss 2 days of work she couldn't afford to lose, borrowing leftover antibiotics from a neighbor who still had some from last time. Social isolation was suffocating. Sarah had no friends her age. Most of her old classmates had gone off to college or landed jobs that came with happy hours and weekends out. Meanwhile, she was stuck in an endless loop of work, baby, bills, and sleep. On weekends, while others went out for drinks, Sarah sat on the couch watching cartoons with Noah, pretending she didn't miss the youth she never got to live. The weight of having no professional prospects pressed on her like a boulder. No college degree, no real work experience. Sarah knew she was stuck in low-wage jobs with little room to grow. She dreamed of going back to school, maybe taking a technical course, but how could she manage that when she could barely keep the lights on? The future looked like a brick wall. No doors, no windows. Tiny emergencies were full-blown earthquakes in her fragile reality. When Noah dropped and shattered the last bottle she had, Sarah had to feed him from a cup with shaky hands and endless patience. When she ran out of diapers in the middle of the night and the stores were closed, she grabbed a dish towel and some paper clips and hoped for the best. Every problem demanded a level of creativity born out of pure desperation. The psychological pressure of not being able to provide the bare minimum for her child gnawed at Sarah day and night. She'd see other kids with bright toys, fresh clothes, brand new strollers, and feel a bitter cocktail of envy and guilt. Noah deserved all of it, and so much more, but she couldn't give him even the basics without stretching herself to the breaking point. That crushing mom guilt sat heavy on shoulders already worn thin. Sarah's first attempt to improve her situation came in the form of a second job, something she found posted on the diner's bulletin board. A telemarketing company was hiring people to work from home, making sales calls during overnight hours. To Sarah, it sounded perfect. She could care for Noah during the day and work while he slept at night. The interview process was humiliating. She had to borrow a better phone just to get through it. Her own barely worked. During the call, Noah started crying in the background and Sarah scrambled to calm him while answering the recruiter's questions. "Are you sure you can maintain a quiet work environment?" they asked, doubt thick in their tone. Sarah said yes, knowing full well it was a lie. The first few weeks were a sleepless nightmare. Sarah worked from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., calling people who either cursed at her or hung up before she could finish her pitch. Then she'd get 2 hours of sleep before Noah woke up and spend the rest of the day running on fumes, barely functioning zombie-like. Her body started to shut down, constant headaches, hand tremors, memory lapses. The sales goals were impossible for someone in Sarah's situation. She had to sell at least 10 products a night to earn commission, but most people hung up before she even got through the introduction. When she finally made a sale, it often got canceled because of some technicality. Her base pay was pitiful, barely enough to cover the phone charges she racked up just trying to do the job. Noah sensed the shift in their routine and became more irritable during the day. He could tell something was off. His mom was more tense, more tired, less present even when she was physically there. Sarah felt crushed by guilt. She was always running on empty, and Noah was getting the scraps of her attention. Feeding him became harder. More than once, she nodded off mid-bottle with him in her arms. Things came crashing down when Sarah accidentally fell asleep during a sales call. A supervisor monitoring the line caught her. She tried to explain, begged for another chance, swore it wouldn't happen again. "Maybe this kind of job just isn't for you," he said coldly, before hanging up. The next day, she was let go by email. The failure hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah locked herself in the bathroom and cried quietly so Noah wouldn't hear. She pounded the wall until her fists turned red. It had been her first real attempt to change their situation, and she had failed miserably. The shame, the feeling of being utterly incapable, gnawed at her soul. She started to wonder if maybe she really wasn't cut out to give her son a better life. Desperate for another option, Sarah tried selling homemade sweets, brigadeiros and coconut balls, to co-workers and neighbors. She spent her last bit of savings on ingredients, carefully calculating that if she sold everything, she could triple her investment. She stayed up all night cooking while Noah slept, her hands forming hundreds of tiny balls of hope. Reality was brutal. Her co-workers politely declined, saying they were on diets or low on cash. Her neighbors bought a few out of pity, but in tiny amounts. Sarah sold less than half and ended up eating the rest to avoid waste, gaining weight she couldn't afford with the little she ate. The financial loss was small on paper, but emotionally, it was devastating. Her third attempt came through a free online graphic design course she found at the public library. She bundled Noah into the stroller and made the trip 3 times a week, settling in at the public computers and trying to learn a skill she could eventually monetize. But Noah didn't cooperate. He cried for attention, and Sarah rarely finished a single lesson before packing up to leave. Other library patrons began to complain about the noise, and Sarah felt more and more ashamed. One staff member even suggested she come back when you're not with a child, as if Noah was an accessory she could just leave behind. Sarah dropped the course halfway through, once again feeling like the world just wasn't built for young, poor moms trying to claw their way out. Each failed attempt chipped away at her spirit. Sarah started to believe maybe this really was her fate. Maybe she really was the irresponsible girl people whispered about. The little hope that once flickered weakly in her chest started to dim, like a candle struggling to stay lit in the wind. Her final attempt was the most heartbreaking. Sarah seriously considered putting Noah up for adoption. She convinced herself that maybe another family, one with more stability, could give him everything she couldn't. She went as far as researching the process, even made a call to an agency. But when the social worker asked a few simple questions about her reasons, Sarah broke down on the phone and hung up. She never revisited the idea, but the guilt of even thinking about it haunted her every night. Sarah's first meaningful connection came from the most unexpected place: Mrs. Carmen, the 70-year-old woman who lived next door. At first, Sarah only knew her as the cranky neighbor who banged on the wall whenever Noah cried too loud. But one afternoon, as Sarah returned from work juggling the baby and a load of groceries, she tripped on the stairs and dropped everything. Mrs. Carmen appeared at her door, not to complain, but to help. "Girl, you can't carry all that by yourself," the older woman said in a rough but kind voice, bending down to help Sarah pick up scattered diapers from the steps. In that moment, Sarah caught something in her neighbor's tired eyes, an understanding like she recognized the weight Sarah carried every day. "I used to be young and alone too, you know. I remember how heavy it feels." Slowly, Mrs. Carmen became a quiet presence in Sarah's life. She offered tiny acts of kindness that made a huge difference. Watching Noah while Sarah ran down to grab the mail, lending her a cup of sugar, sharing leftover soup when she made too much. But more important than the practical help was the companionship, the simple healing sense that someone cared. "You remind me of my daughter at your age," Mrs. Carmen admitted one rainy afternoon as they sipped tea in her small but cozy kitchen. She had a baby young too, faced the world alone, but she turned out strong. Sarah learned that Mrs. Carmen's daughter had become a nurse, raised 3 kids on her own, and now lived comfortably. It was the first time someone gave Sarah a real example that it was possible to come out the other side. At the diner, Sarah found another unexpected ally: Miguel, the 40-year-old cook from the morning shift. A father of 2, he recognized the exhaustion in Sarah's eyes and always saved her an extra sandwich to take home. "A mom who doesn't eat right can't take care of a baby right," he'd say in his thick accent, sliding the plate toward her. "Eat, girl, chef's orders." Miguel lived by a simple philosophy: everybody needs help sometimes. No shame in that. The real shame is letting pride get in the way of your kid's well-being. He told her stories from when he was a new immigrant, how people helped him get on his feet, how he learned that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom. Sarah started to see her own struggles from a different angle. The most surprising connection came through a young mom named Jessica, whom Sarah met in the waiting room at the public clinic. Jessica was only 21 but already raising 2 kids on her own and studying nursing at night. She radiated a quiet confidence Sarah deeply admired, but also a kindness that made her feel welcome. "You're new at this, huh?" Jessica said with a warm smile, noticing how Sarah struggled to calm Noah. "We were all new once," she added gently. "The only difference is some of us had help. Others had to figure it all out on our own. But no mom should have to go through this completely alone." Jessica taught her practical tips: how to get Noah to sleep better, how to save on diapers, how to manage the crushing guilt that came with motherhood. Jessica became more than a friend. She became the big sister Sarah never had. They texted each other, traded advice, shared the heartache of single motherhood. When Sarah doubted herself, Jessica was the one to remind her, "You're not just doing your best, you're working miracles every single day." Sarah's relationship with Dr. Martinez, Noah's pediatrician, also grew beyond the typical doctor-patient dynamic. He noticed how attentive she was, how she wrote everything down, how she always showed up on time even after riding 3 different buses. "You're an exceptional mother," he told her once, and Sarah tucked those words into her heart like a treasured keepsake. Dr. Martinez began spending more time during visits, explaining not just Noah's health but his developmental milestones, how to engage him with simple toys, how to encourage learning. He saw potential in Sarah and made sure she knew it. "Your son's lucky to have a mother this dedicated," he often said, and for the first time, Sarah started to believe it. Through Jessica, Sarah met other young moms who formed an informal support network. They met at the park on Sundays, swapped outgrown baby clothes, shared job leads, and vented about the trials of early motherhood. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she belonged, like she was part of something bigger, surrounded by people who got it. Those connections started to shift how Sarah saw herself. She realized she wasn't the only young mom struggling. Not a failure, not weak, not hopeless. Other women had walked similar paths and come out stronger. More importantly, Sarah began to recognize strengths in herself she'd never seen before. She was resilient. She was nurturing. She was fiercely determined. and she was far more capable than she'd ever imagined. The empathy she received from these special people began to heal old wounds. For the first time, Sarah felt what it was like to be accepted without judgment, supported without conditions, loved without needing to prove she deserved it. These relationships planted seeds of self-worth that would grow slowly, but with deep roots, preparing her for the challenges and the opportunities still to come. The day that would change everything started just like all the others, with Sarah counting the last few coins in the glass jar on top of the fridge, whispering a silent prayer that it would be enough. Noah had cried most of the night, and she suspected he was hungrier than usual. The formula can showed its metallic bottom, just a few scoops left, barely enough to last until noon. It was Tuesday. Her next paycheck from the diner wouldn't come until Friday. The math was cruel and exact: 2 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels, and 17 pennies. Total, $107. The cheapest can of baby formula cost $1.57. She was exactly 50 cents short, a ridiculously small amount that now stood between feeding her baby or watching him go hungry until the weekend. Sarah looked over at Noah in his makeshift crib, sleeping soundly after a bottle made with the last of the formula. His chubby, rosy cheeks were proof that despite everything, she had managed to keep him fed and healthy. But for how long? The question echoed in her mind like a funeral bell, ringing with the rhythm of rising panic. She ran through every possible option. Ask Mrs. Carmen? The sweet old neighbor had already done so much, and Sarah knew she barely survived on a tiny pension. Call Jessica? It was way too early, and she didn't want to wake her friend's kids. Request an advance at work? Mr. Rodriguez had made it clear, no advances for part-timers. The feeling of helplessness was physical, like a giant hand pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Sarah sank to the kitchen floor, resting her head on her knees, and gave herself a few minutes to fall apart. The tears came hot and silent, full of months of sleepless nights, sacrifices that never felt like enough, and quiet fears that were starting to scream. I can't fail him, she whispered into the stillness of the apartment. He only has me. If I can't even buy him formula, what kind of mother am I? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her face, trying to muffle the sobs so she wouldn't wake Noah. The full weight of being entirely responsible for another life was finally pressing down hard enough to break her. And it was in that moment, right there on the cold kitchen floor, that Sarah made the decision that would lead her to Walmart that morning. She'd put on her best coat, the only coat she had, bundle Noah into the stroller Jessica had loaned her, take the counted coins and walk there. If she had to beg, she would. If she had to plead for a discount, she would. If it meant sacrificing every shred of dignity she had left, so be it. The walk to the store was a psychological marathon. Each step heavier than the last, every breath weighed down by the certainty she was heading into yet another humiliation. In her mind, she rehearsed what she'd say to the cashier. Please, I'm just 50 cents short. I'll pay the rest Friday. My baby needs to eat. The words sounded pathetic even in her thoughts, but she was ready to say them out loud if she had to. Detroit's winter wind sliced through her thin coat like knives, but Sarah barely felt it. Her entire being was focused on one mission: get that formula. Noah slept peacefully in the stroller, blissfully unaware of the silent battle raging inside his mother. He trusted her completely, that blind, absolute trust only babies have in their moms. Sarah couldn't betray that trust. Inside the Walmart, everything felt louder, brighter, sharper. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly. The aisles stretched out like canyons. The shelves seemed taller than usual. Sarah walked straight to the baby aisle, grabbed the cheapest can of formula she could find, and made her way to the checkout like someone marching toward a final judgment. The line felt endless. She stood behind an older woman stocking up for the entire month, watching expensive items beep across the scanner. Premium cuts of meat, imported wine, gourmet desserts. Each beep sounded like a cruel reminder of everything she couldn't give Noah, everything he was missing out on. Finally, it was her turn. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the formula on the counter. The cashier, a bored teenager who didn't bother looking up, scanned the can. $1.57, he mumbled. Sarah opened her wallet and poured every coin onto the counter. The clink of metal filled the space like the tolling of a funeral bell. She counted once, twice, 3 times. The coins mocked her, always falling short. $1.07, she whispered, more to herself than to the cashier. The 50-cent gap might as well have been a canyon. And that was the moment, right there at checkout, that Sarah Mitchell hit rock bottom. She discovered the line where human strength runs out, where sheer willpower just isn't enough. Sarah stood frozen at the checkout, the coins spread across the counter like shattered pieces of her dignity. The cashier sighed impatiently, drumming his fingers as the line behind her started to grumble. "Ma'am, you're 50 cents short," he said, his tone sharp as if she had somehow chosen to be in this position. Sarah felt her face flush with shame. "I know I'm short," she replied, her voice trembling as she tried to stay composed. "Please, isn't there something we can do? It's for my baby." She gestured toward Noah in the stroller, who was beginning to squirm, sensing the tension around him. The cashier glanced at the baby, then back at Sarah, and shook his head. "Can't give discounts, ma'am. If you don't have the full amount, I'll have to remove the item." The words hit like a knife to the chest. Sarah looked around in desperation, hoping someone, anyone, might step in. Her tears threatened to spill, but she fought to hold them back. She wouldn't break down here. She wouldn't give the crowd the show they seemed ready to watch with pity or irritation. Behind her, someone muttered something about people shopping with no money, and another whispered, "Should have thought about that before having a kid so young." Every comment was salt in an already raw wound. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the last ounce of strength left in her tired body. She would not give up. She couldn't. "Please," she said again, locking eyes with the cashier. "My son is hungry. I swear I'll pay the 50 cents next week. I'll leave my ID, my phone number, whatever it takes." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. The young cashier looked uncomfortable but shook his head again. And that's when she heard a voice behind her. A man, speaking into a phone, calm but firm. "Cancel the 3 p.m. meeting. Something more important came up." She turned slightly and saw a tall man in a flawless suit slipping his phone into his pocket. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah saw something she hadn't expected, genuine understanding, not pity. The man walked up to the register without saying anything to her at first. "I'd like to cover this lady's purchase," he said simply, pulling a leather wallet from inside his blazer. Sarah stood stunned, unsure how to respond. "No, sir, I can't accept that," she stammered. But the man gently raised a hand. "Please let me," said Robert Harrison, looking at her with eyes that were kind but firm. "This isn't charity. It's one mother helping another. My own mom raised me on her own, too." He handed the cashier his card, then turned to Sarah. "Actually, I'd like to cover all of her groceries today. What else do you need?" Sarah was speechless. After months of struggling alone, of slammed doors and silent pleas, someone was helping without asking for anything in return. Tears of relief and gratitude finally slipped down her cheeks. I don't know what to say," she whispered, clutching Noah tighter to her chest. "You don't have to say anything," Robert replied gently. "But if I may suggest, how about we get you and your baby a few more essentials? Diapers, food, whatever you need." Sarah wanted to refuse. Her pride screamed not to accept. But when she looked at Noah, she knew she couldn't let pride get in the way of his well-being. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah found herself walking the aisles of Walmart with a stranger who was quietly changing her life. Robert didn't ask invasive questions or make her explain herself. He simply walked beside her, suggesting practical things. More formula, diapers, baby food, some fresh fruit for her. "Do you work?" Robert asked at one point, his tone curious but not condescending. Sarah told him about her job at the diner, about the struggle of balancing work and motherhood alone. He listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, not just to be polite but because he was truly interested. By the time they reached the checkout again, the total had climbed to nearly $100, more food than Sarah had bought in the last 2 months combined. As Robert paid, he did something that surprised her even more. He pulled out a business card, scribbled something on the back, and handed it to her. "I'm Robert Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries," he said plainly. We're always looking for hard-working, dedicated people. If you're ever interested in something better, give me a call." Sarah looked down at the card in disbelief. On the back, he had written, "For Sarah, a warrior mom who deserves every opportunity in the world." As they walked out of the store, bags at their feet and Noah sleeping peacefully in the stroller, Sarah finally found her voice. "Why did you do this? Why help me?" Robert stopped and looked at her, his sincerity unmistakable. "Because 30 years ago my mom was you," he said. "Because I believe that when you can help, you should. And because I saw something in you. A strength most people will never understand." In that cold Walmart parking lot, surrounded by bags of groceries and the warmth of a sleeping child, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that kept her moving day to day, but the solid, unwavering belief that maybe, just maybe, things could actually get better. 3 days after the encounter at Walmart, Sarah still stared at Robert Harrison's business card like it was a magic artifact, unable to believe any of it had actually happened. She had looked up Harrison Industries at the public library and learned it was one of the largest tech companies in Detroit, employing thousands and holding multi-million-dollar contracts. Robert Harrison wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the most influential businessmen in the city. It took her 2 full days to build up the courage to make the call. Sarah rehearsed the conversation dozens of times in her head, imagining every possible outcome. Maybe he wouldn't remember her, or maybe the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. When she finally dialed the number, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly hung up before anyone could answer. "Harrison Industries, CEO's office," a professional female voice said on the line. I'd like to speak with Mr. Harrison, please. My name is Sarah Mitchell. He gave me his card a few days ago." Sarah braced herself to be redirected or told to leave a message that would never be returned. But to her surprise, the secretary responded, "Oh yes, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Harrison's been expecting your call. May I transfer you now?" When Robert answered, his voice was warm and genuinely happy. "Sarah, I'm so glad you called. How's Noah?" The fact that he remembered her baby's name made her heart ache in the best way. They chatted for a few minutes about how she was doing, her job at the diner, her dreams and goals. Then Robert made an offer that left Sarah completely speechless. "Sarah, I'd like to offer you a position at our company. This isn't charity. It's a real opportunity based on what I've seen in your character and your determination." He explained there would be a training period, that she'd learn administrative and customer service skills, and that the starting salary would be 3 times what she was earning at the diner. Sarah had to sit down. Her legs simply gave out from the shock and relief. But the biggest twist came when Robert paused and his tone shifted. "Sarah, I have to confess something. That meeting at Walmart, it wasn't entirely by chance." Her heart started to race. "What do you mean?" she asked, a flicker of fear running through her. "I'd seen you before," Robert continued. "At the diner where you work. I stop there sometimes when I have meetings nearby. I noticed how you treated customers, how you worked so hard even when you looked completely exhausted. I saw you once at the bus stop in the rain holding Noah, and I wanted to help. But I didn't know how to approach you without it coming off inappropriate." Sarah sat silently, trying to process this. Robert had noticed her, had seen her struggle from afar. "When I saw you at the store that day, I knew it was my chance. It wasn't a coincidence I was there. I followed you quietly, hoping for the right moment to step in without making you feel embarrassed." His brutal honesty left him exposed. "You followed me?" Sarah asked, unsure whether to feel uneasy or deeply moved. "I know how that sounds," Robert said quickly. "And I know it might seem strange, maybe even unsettling. But Sarah, when you grow up without a father and watch your mother fight tooth and nail to raise you like mine did, you develop a radar for recognizing that struggle in others." He went on to tell her his own story, how his mother, Maria, had immigrated from Mexico pregnant and alone, how she worked 3 jobs to raise him, and how he'd made a promise to himself that one day he would repay the kindness strangers had shown his family when they had nothing. "You reminded me so much of her at that age, I just couldn't look away." Then came the most shocking part of all. "Sarah, I want you to know this opportunity isn't out of pity. It's because after watching you these past few weeks, I saw everything I look for in a great employee: dedication, punctuality, respect for others, and the ability to keep going under pressure. You don't realize it, but you already passed the toughest interview life could give. Sarah was crying now, but not from sadness. It was a deep, aching kind of relief that made her chest feel hollow and full at the same time. Robert, I don't know what to say. This is all just surreal. He chuckled softly. Say you'll take the job. Say you're ready for a better life. For you and Noah. Say you believe you deserve it because you do, Sarah. But why are you doing all this? She asked, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Because sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason, Robert said. You showed up in my life at a moment when I needed to remember why I built this company. To be in a position to help people like you. People like my mother was. The call ended with Sarah not only accepting the job, but also agreeing to let Robert help her find a better apartment, childcare for Noah during work hours, and health insurance for both of them. It was like he had crafted a full rescue plan, as if he already knew what she needed before she even said a word. When she hung up the phone, Sarah turned to Noah, sleeping peacefully in his makeshift crib, and whispered, Baby, our life is about to change. It's really happening. For the first time in 19 years, Sarah Mitchell believed, truly believed, that the future might actually be brighter than the past, and that the dreams she'd buried deep inside her heart finally had a chance to come true. Sarah's first day at Harrison Industries hit like a storm of nerves and anticipation. She woke at 5 a.m., a full 2 hours early, and couldn't fall back asleep. Standing in front of the tiny bathroom mirror, she stared at her reflection with critical eyes. The blazer Jessica had lent her was a bit too big, but it was the closest thing she had to corporate attire. Her hands trembled as she tried to pull her hair back into something that looked halfway professional, fighting off the feeling that she was dressing up as someone she wasn't. The bus ride into downtown Detroit felt endless, every stop only feeding her anxiety. She clutched Robert's business card like a good luck charm, reading the address for the 10th time to make sure she didn't get lost. The other passengers wore expensive coats, carried sleek leather briefcases, and chatted on their phones about deals and deadlines she didn't understand. She felt like an imposter, a stranger in a world that wasn't meant for her. And deep down, she wondered if this was all some huge mistake. The Harrison Industries building towered above the city, a sleek monument of glass and steel that mirrored the gray Detroit sky. Sarah stood at the curb for several minutes, craning her neck to take it all in. She'd admired buildings like this from a distance her whole life, never once imagining she'd walk into one as an employee. The lobby was vast and gleaming, all polished marble and designer lighting. She approached the front desk with hesitant steps, feeling small in a place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Good morning. I'm Sarah Mitchell. Today's my first day, she said, her voice trying to sound confident. The receptionist smiled politely and directed her to the 12th floor, where HR was located. In the elevator, she watched the floor numbers light up one by one, each level pulling her further from her past and closer to a future that still felt like a dream. When the doors opened, she took a deep breath and stepped into her new reality. Margaret Thompson, the HR manager, was a poised woman in her 50s with neatly tied gray hair and glasses that made her eyes look too big. She greeted Sarah with a firm handshake and a smile that seemed genuine, though there was something in her gaze Sarah couldn't quite place. So you're the famous Sarah Mitchell, Margaret said, leading her into a conference room. Mr. Harrison's spoken quite a bit about you. I hope you're ready for a few interesting challenges. During her first week, Sarah threw herself into the training with the desperation of someone who knew she couldn't afford to fail. She learned corporate systems, customer service protocols, administrative processes, all of it completely new to her. Every detail was absorbed with the intensity of someone rebuilding her identity from scratch. But as the days passed, she began to notice sideways glances from co-workers, whispers that stopped when she walked into a room, a subtle tension that followed her like a shadow. The first confrontation came from Bradley Morrison, a middle-aged executive who'd been with the company for over a decade. During a department meeting, he made a seemingly offhand comment. Funny how some people get opportunities without going through the usual hiring process. His words were aimed at the group, but his eyes were locked on Sarah. The silence that followed was sharp and suffocating. Her face burned with shame. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words got stuck in her dry throat. At the end of her second week, Robert called Sarah into his office. The space was breathtaking, with a panoramic view of the city and furniture that probably cost more than her yearly rent. But Sarah barely noticed the decor. Her focus was on the serious look on Robert's face. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct," he said, motioning for her to sit. "There are people questioning your hiring, saying it wasn't exactly standard. I need to know if you're ready to face some pushback because it's only going to get louder." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She'd been naive to think this transition would be smooth, that people would simply accept her presence without question. "They think I don't deserve to be here," she said, not as a question but a truth. Robert leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "It doesn't matter what they think. What matters is what you do to prove them wrong. This is your shot, but it's also your fight." The defining moment came in her third week, during a high-stakes presentation for major clients. Sarah had spent days working on a customer satisfaction report, a project Margaret had assigned her personally. It was her big chance to prove she belonged. But minutes before the presentation, Bradley approached with urgent revisions that completely changed the data. "You made some rookie mistakes," he said with a smug smile. "Lucky I caught them in time." Sarah stared at the revised papers, knowing her original numbers were correct. Bradley had altered the data, deliberately, hoping to humiliate her in front of the clients and the leadership team. It was a moment of choice. Stay silent and accept the blow or fight for her credibility. She thought of Noah, of the night she spent studying that report after he fell asleep, of every voice that ever told her she couldn't make it, and something fierce and quiet rose inside her, like a flame igniting in the dark. "With all due respect, Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word, "these aren't the correct figures." She stood, walked to the projector and faced the room. "Allow me to show you the actual data, based on first-hand research I conducted with every single client listed in this report." The silence in the room was electric. Robert watched from the corner, his expression unreadable, but Sarah caught the flicker of approval in his eyes. This was the moment that wouldn't just define her career, but the moment she finally showed the world who she really was when pushed to the edge. Sarah closed the door to her new apartment with a quiet click, letting the silence settle around her. But for the first time in months, that silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The place still smelled faintly of fresh paint, and the furniture was modest, but there was warmth in the details. A colorful rug she'd picked out herself, Noah's crib set up right beside the bed, and a tiny plant on the windowsill, a gift from Mrs. Carmen. It was small, but it was home. During her first few days at Harrison Industries, Sarah forced herself to keep her head high, to walk those corporate hallways with confidence, to breathe deeply every time that old fear of not being enough tried to creep in. She began to understand that her place there didn't depend on anyone else's approval. It came from everything she had survived. "I have just as much as they do. Maybe even more," she repeated to herself like a quiet mantra. The tension with some coworkers didn't vanish entirely, but something inside Sarah had shifted. She no longer responded with shame or silence. She responded with competence. Every finished task, every meeting where her voice was heard, every time she explained data with calm certainty, it all became another brick in the foundation of a new identity. The corporate world was still tough at times, but she was no longer the trembling girl at the supermarket checkout. Robert had become more than a generous CEO. He was a quiet mentor. They didn't talk often, but sometimes just a nod from him in a meeting reminded Sarah where she'd started. "You remind me why I started all this," he once told her after watching her guide a nervous new hire. Sarah carried those words with her for days. Outside of work, Sarah was rebuilding herself, piece by piece. She returned to the same library where she had once tried to study with Noah crying in her lap. Now, with a company-loaned laptop and a full hour to herself, she started a new online course. Graphic design is still on pause, she thought, smiling. But maybe marketing could be the thing. This time, learning felt like freedom, not desperation. She jotted notes with the purple pen Jessica had given her and felt, finally, like a student again. Her relationship with Noah was evolving too. He seemed calmer now, more smiley, as if he could sense his mother's relief. They had a rhythm: breakfast with fruit, afternoons at the playground, warm baths before bedtime. Sarah was finally learning how to play with him, not just soothe him between crises. And at night, when he drifted off quickly, she'd light a candle, open a journal, and rediscover her voice. One evening, sitting on her new apartment balcony with a warm cup of tea, Sarah wrote in her notebook, "We are not what the world throws at us. We are what we build from it." And for the first time, she truly believed it. She realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a builder of futures, of connection, of a new life. She was an artist of hope, even if no one called her that out loud. Jessica, her fiercest and most loyal friend, nearly cried when she visited Sarah's new home. "Girl, look at you," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "You're glowing, and you don't even see it." Sarah laughed shyly. Glowing? More like hanging on by a thread. But deep down she knew there was something different in her reflection now. A kind of light that didn't come from her face but from within, from the space where fear used to live. Sundays at the park with the other moms had become a new tradition. And now, Sarah was the one giving advice, sharing budgeting tips, recommending free courses, encouraging others. She was becoming the mentor she never had. And when someone said, "You inspire me," she still flinched a little. But slowly she was learning to believe it. The loneliness that had once clung to her like skin now felt like an old coat she no longer needed to wear. Life still wasn't perfect. There were bills, hard nights, the constant anxiety of someone who had known deep scarcity. But now Sarah knew she could face it. She had tools, and, more importantly, she had faith. With each small victory she felt a little more free, a little more in charge. She didn't want to just survive anymore. She wanted to bloom. At a quarterly performance review, Margaret, the same HR manager who once watched her with skepticism, said something Sarah would never forget. "You're one of the most impressive surprises to ever come through this department. Smart, organized, incredibly resilient. Keep going." Sarah almost cried, not because she needed Margaret's approval, but because those words marked something bigger. She was finally being recognized on her own merit. On her way home that day, Sarah passed the old building she used to live in. On impulse, she stopped and looked up at the window of her former apartment. A knot formed in her throat. "A version of me cried there every night," she whispered. But now, standing in front of that chapter of her past, she smiled, because she knew she had made it. And maybe, just maybe, she was only getting started. Sarah never imagined that 50 cents could be the first step toward such a profound transformation. When she looked back at the quiet desperation on her kitchen floor, at the hesitant push of that shopping cart in Walmart, at the whispered humiliation in line, she no longer saw just pain. She saw rebirth, as if every tear that had fallen had watered the soil where her new life would one day bloom. It was the kind of story no one would believe, if it weren't true. Today, what Sarah carries isn't just financial stability or a shiny name badge with gold lettering. It's the unshakable truth that she won, not by luck, but by grit, by persistence, by choosing to keep going when every sign screamed, "Give up." What she built, brick by emotional brick, was a castle rising from the ruins. And no one could ever take that from her. Noah now attends a daycare filled with colorful toys, kind teachers, and warm meals. Every afternoon, Sarah watches him run into her arms with the carefree smile of a child who has no idea how hard his mother fought for that lightness. "Mommy, today I played superhero," he says, and she smiles, because deep down she knows who the real superhero of this story is. Imagine if Robert hadn't stopped in that store that day. Imagine if Sarah hadn't made that call. Imagine if no one had noticed that tear. Small details build big changes. Sometimes, the line between falling and rising is simply the choice to speak up through the shame, to accept help, to move forward, scared, but still moving. Because that's what we do in the end. We trade places. One day, we're the ones who need help. The next, we're the ones reaching out. the wheel turns. And what you do with what you've been given might just be the beginning of someone else's story. The question is, are you paying attention to the stories life is trying to tell you? In the upcoming videos on this channel, we'll meet more stories just like this one. Real, emotional, life-changing. Stories that'll make you laugh, cry, reflect, and above all, believe again in the power of a fresh start. So stick around. Thank you for watching all the way through. Truly. It's because of you that these stories come to life. Come back often, drop a comment, share it, subscribe, and we're just getting started. See you in the next video.